Don't be a bully. Be a star. Unless you own the WWE, then just do whatever the hell you want and pretend you're not one of the biggest bullies around. So goes the tale of Vince McMahon. His company has given us a lot of great moments that unite us as fans, fill us with hope, and make the world a better place. But then, there's some really mean, cruel on-air moments that are out of line and degrading to humanity as a whole. As much as WWE tries to pretend that they're a caring, family-friendly company, their history states otherwise. So let's relive some of their meanness. I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and here are 10 of WWE's cruelest on-air moments. Number 10, Billy and Chuck's wedding. Hey, two grown men who love each other. Isn't that the funniest thing you've ever seen? No, not at all, unless your name is Vince McMahon, because in 2002, he thought Billy and Chuck was comedy gold. You see, Billy and Chuck were two muscular dudes, but the joke was that they were gay. So why is no one laughing? They performed in a bunch of over-the-top skits that showed off their stereotypical gayness, because nobody in WWE has ever heard of the word subtlety. To top it off, they were going to get married on SmackDown. A few gay rights groups were happy with the news, but fans had their suspicions that it wasn't going to end well. And it didn't. Turned out Billy and Chuck faked being gay because they wanted attention? They were then beaten up by two large Samoan men. Luckily, these days the company has gotten over their homophobia. Except when Vince is in the mood for an R-Truth and Goldust skit. Number 9, Eddie Guerrero. In hell? Eddie Guerrero's death was one of the most heartbreaking moments in wrestling this generation. He was only 38 and left behind a family and millions of fans. Out of respect, WWE aired a couple of touching tribute episodes after his passing. If only they'd left it at that. For some reason, Eddie continued to stay a part of storylines in increasingly offensive fashion. With fans still in shock, an episode of SmackDown had Randy Orton confronting Eddie's good friend Rey Mysterio Jr. and told him that Eddie was in hell. Luckily, WWE realized this was horribly offensive, they apologized and moved away from it. Just kidding. The next week, Orton drove out one of Eddie's lowriders into the ring, and where did he get that from? And continued to make fun of Rey over his real-life friend dying. Oh yeah, and the lowrider later blew up at an angle. Good God, Vince. Reportedly, The Rock was so turned off by this storyline that it held off his WWE return for years. Sadly, Eddie wasn't the last Guerrero to be mistreated on air. Number 8, BABYFACES harass Vickie. Vickie Guerrero was a woman who overcame tragedy, joined wrestling late in life, lost a bunch of weight, and became a crazy over-wrestling character. It's a pretty amazing story. But to Vince McMahon, she was just overweight, like morbidly obese to him. Since he had been surrounding himself with model-esque women for years, perhaps he forgot what a normal, healthy woman looked like. So he gave the okay for babyfaces Jerry Lawler and John Cena to tear into her whenever possible. At the 2010 Slammy Awards, it all reached a low point when they took turns insulting her. Lawler: I can't help if you're the only diva whose bathtub has stretch marks. Cena: Vickie is so fat she wakes up in sections. Lawler: did you know that when God said let there be light, he had to ask Vickie to move out of the way first? Cena: Vickie is so fat that her baby pictures had to be taken by satellite. Hustle, loyalty, respect, and fat jokes about women. Number 7, Piggy James. Vince's fun with body-shaming women sadly wasn't one and done. The beautiful and athletic Mickie James also had to suffer through it. You see, she isn't exactly the size of Michelle McCool or Layla, so that made her the size of 5 hippos to the boss. The storyline was like a bad high school drama with Lay Cool endlessly mocking Mickie, or as they called her, Piggy James. Instead of Mickie being booked to kick both of their asses, they had her cry. Some may argue that it was just a storyline and point to Mickie winning the Divas title for McCool as revenge. However, it was Lay Cool who won the feud and took the title back in the end. Oh, and which one of the 3 was released? Despite being more popular, more charismatic, and a better wrestler than McCool and Layla, it was Mickie. It seems the only thing WWE cared about, though, was a few extra pounds. Number 6, Masters Emasculated. If we're being honest, Chris Masters only got a big push because of his physique. Unfortunately, it was that body that also got him in trouble. In a backstage segment on Raw, Masters was talking to Eric Bischoff about the book he'd just released, until high school bullies Triple H and Shawn Michaels butted in. After Bischoff told the two 40-year-old men who were acting like teenagers that he thought DX was a ripoff of the NWO, he left, walking out a hero. But then Hunter asked Masters when his book was coming out, and he happily replied that he was working on one. Hunter responded, "What are you gonna call it? How to lose 50 pounds in 4 weeks?" You see, the joke was Masters was a bit less muscular because he had recently returned from failing a wellness policy test. So not only was he suspended and embarrassed, but then the second most powerful man in the company mocked him on air for it. No other job in the world would do that to one of their employees. Number 5, NATALYA'S tummy problems. There have been plenty of awful gimmicks in WWE history: Bastion Booger, Beaver Cleavage, and the Boogeyman, just to name 3 from the Bees, but have any been so pointless and unnecessarily mean as giving Natalya gas on a constant basis? There's just something about Vince McMahon where he loves to have fun at the heart's expense. Perhaps they take themselves too seriously, perhaps he's just a big jerk. Who's to say? But despite Natalya showing a lot of promise her first couple years in the company, the boss must not have thought she was entertaining enough, so he gave her gas. A lot of it. Out of nowhere, Natalya would fart. In backstage skits, McMahon and grade school children everywhere had a good laugh over it. It's actually a bit amazing that he didn't laugh himself to death when she delivered a killer fart on Hornswoggle. Number 4, Rosie and the Donald. Rosie O'Donnell and Donald Trump weren't getting along. Rosie called the Donald out for not firing the winner of the Miss USA contest over drug abuse. He fired back by calling her fat. Naturally, this turned into a wrestling storyline because Vince McMahon has some serious mental issues. To settle things, Vince booked them in a match on Raw. By them, I mean a bad Rosie impersonator and indie wrestler Ace Steel in a goofy wig. You would think a joke like this would last 1, maybe 2 minutes top, but it didn't. It went 7 long, agonizing minutes of pushing and slapping at each other for only Vince's amusement. What seemed to tickle him the most is the fact that Rosie is a little overweight. Among the barbs shot at Rosie's way was that she possessed a lesbianic fury and was described as a double-chin diva. Even good old JR couldn't help but join in on the fun as he noted that it looks like Rosie has bulked up for this contest. You know things are really bad when even Ross turns into an ass. Number 3, a really bad impression. Well, speaking of Jim Ross, it's well known that the man has suffered with Bell's palsy. It's a condition that can paralyze the muscles in your face. What you may not know is that his boss finds that absolutely hilarious. Despite Vince McMahon saying how much he hates bullies, he's a bigger bully than Bully Ray and the Blacktop Bully combined. For some reason, one of his favorite targets is Ross, and it's not quite clear why. Ross is known to be a bit surly, so maybe that rubs Vince the wrong way. Maybe it's because he talks about barbecue sauce a lot. Maybe it's because he knows more about wrestling than Vince does. Whatever it is, he just loves to poke and embarrass his longtime employee on air. One of the most inexcusable televised attacks against him featured Hornswoggle on an episode of Raw. Now, it was bad enough that Swoggle was acting like JR for no good reason, but apparently the shorter man's impression of Ross was not to the boss's liking, so he decided to do one himself. Vince scrunched up half of his face to yell out "Stone Cold" a few times to his own amusement, while millions gasped on in horror. It's too bad that this didn't lead to a match where Vince got his ass kicked. And speaking of asses, in the worst voiceover transition of all time, number 2, Jim Ross and Dr. HEINY. Yes, we are not quite done with Jim Ross on this list, sadly. In October of 2005, Ross was fired in an angle because he was having serious issues with his colon in real life and needed to take some time off. Just days after having major surgery, Vince McMahon took this opportunity to mock his employee of a dozen years in a crude, unnecessary, and amazingly unfunny skit. For some reason known only to Vince, he wanted to recreate the surgery for millions of fans. It was the boss himself starring as Dr. HEINY. Get it? A butt. Because he's the least clever man alive. The skit was just one object after another being pulled out of Ross' backside, and none of them were funny. It went on way too long, and the payoff was a mannequin head being pulled out of dummy Ross's butt, with McMahon saying that Ross had his head up his ass. 7 minutes for that? And WWE's cruelest on-air moment is the Melanie PILLMAN interview. Vince McMahon is quick to sidestep any blame for the death of any wrestler that has ever competed for him. With Brian Pillman, he was far too quick and far too exploitive. On Sunday, October 6, 1997, Brian's wife Melanie received word that her husband had died in a Minneapolis motel room. The next night, she was invited to appear on Raw and talk to Vince McMahon. It was a really bad idea. 24 hours is nowhere near enough time for someone to process the death of their husband and figure out where life goes next, but there were ratings to be had and blame to be shifted, so she was interviewed live. It was painfully uncomfortable to watch. McMahon actually asked her, "Have you had a chance to think about what you will do as a single parent to support 5 children?" This came from a many times over multimillionaire who had just employed her husband the day before. Try not to feel horrible for her as she tells Vince that little Brian doesn't understand why daddy's not coming home. Was this necessary for Vince to do just one day after Brian's death? Why did not even one of his many infamous yes men try to talk him out of it? Was nobody in the company sane at the time? You can look at all the charity work Vince has done, all the money he's donated, but it's hard to forgive or forget this cruel, tasteless moment in the company's history. Well, that's the list. Got any more cruel WWE moments? Let us know below. Thanks for watching. I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and you can follow me at Andrew Socek on Twitter. Subscribe to our channel for the best non-cruel wrestling videos on the internet.